Welcome to my city stories now. Let's start the story.
Tom Johnson stepped onto Flight 287, scanning the cabin as passengers jostled with carry-ons and settled into their seats. He moved with quiet ease, offering the occasional "excuse me" as he navigated toward his seat near the emergency exit. From row 22A, Karen White peered over the rim of her magazine, her eyes locking onto Tom the moment he entered. There was something about him, something that made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Maybe it was the calm, the confidence in his stride. Maybe it was just him. Her fingers drummed on the armrest, faux reading. While her thoughts churned, her discomfort grew as Tom settled into his seat unbothered, flipping through a book. "Excuse me," Karen whispered as flight attendant Linda passed by. Linda paused, smiling warmly. "Yes, ma'am?" Karen leaned in, voice hushed but firm. "The man near the emergency exit. Are we sure it's safe for someone like him to be sitting there?" Linda followed her gaze to Tom, who was now absorbed in his book. Her smile didn't falter. "Everyone on board has cleared security, ma'am. Seating assignments are in line with FAA safety protocols." Karen's lips tightened. "It's just, with everything going on these days, you can never be too careful." Linda's tone remained professional, but her eyes sharpened. "If there's a specific concern, I'd be happy to address it. Otherwise, we're committed to ensuring all passengers feel safe and respected." She moved on, her face composed, though her eyes briefly met her colleague Jim's as she passed. Karen shifted, frustrated, dismissed. She glanced back at Tom, who had paused his reading to retrieve something from his bag. Her breath hitched slightly. "What's he doing?" Tom calmly checked the label on a small prescription bottle, then tucked it away and returned to his book. He was a man at peace. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling in silence. Linda reached the rear galley and leaned toward Jim. "Seat 18C, she murmured, passenger in 22A's watching him like a hawk. "Racial?" Jim asked quietly. "Feels like it," Linda replied. "Let's stay alert. Could be nothing, could be something." The engines roared to life and the plane began. Taxiing, Tom closed his book, looked out the window and exhaled. It had been a long week. He welcomed the stillness, but behind him Karen White sat stiffly, her thoughts spiraling. Why is no one saying anything? Am I the only one paying attention? As the aircraft leveled after takeoff and the seatbelt sign dinged off, the cabin settled into a steady rhythm. Screens lit up, laptops opened, soft murmurs filled the space. Tom gazed out at the clouds, unaware of the storm quietly brewing 2 rows back. Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. She was about to speak again, this time louder, when a voice rang out from the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Tom Johnson. I'd like to thank you for choosing Flight 287 today." Karen froze, heads turned. Tom, the man she'd been watching with suspicion, stood up and walked toward the cockpit door. A flight attendant opened it. For him, with a respectful nod. Karen's face drained of color, her mouth parted slightly, but no words came. She shrank back into her seat as realization hit, sharp and humiliating. The man Clouds drifted lazily past the window, and with them, Tom Johnson felt the last of the week's stress begin to melt away. He reached down, unzipped his carry-on, and pulled out a small bottle of water. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement, Karen White watching him again. He paused briefly, then shrugged it off. Probably just another passenger scanning the cabin. Nothing unusual, but to Karen, it was anything but ordinary. Her eyes locked onto him with growing suspicion. She watched every motion, the way he checked the bag, the way he zipped it carefully after retrieving the water. Too carefully, she thought. What's he so concerned about? The unease sat heavy in her chest. She glanced around. No one else seemed to notice. Passengers were immersed in movies, books, or conversations, blind to the threat she believed was unfolding before them. Unable to stay silent, Karen pressed the call button again. Linda approached with the same composed smile, though her eyes now held a quiet wariness. "Yes, ma'am? Is everything all right?" Karen leaned in, lowering her voice but not her urgency. "That man by the emergency exit. He's been acting strange. Keeps checking that bag like he's nervous about what's in it. I really think you should do something." Linda followed her gaze again. Tom was calmly flipping a page in his book. "I understand your concern," Linda said, keeping her voice measured. "But unless there's a specific reason, something clearly suspicious, we can't search a passenger's bag. So far, his behavior hasn't raised any red flags." Karen's lips curled with disbelief. "Normal? That's what they always say. People like him always look calm, until they're not. I've seen it on the news. We can't just sit here and wait for something to happen." Linda's expression didn't shift, but her eyes hardened just slightly. "Ma'am, all passengers were thoroughly screened before boarding. We're trained to handle any real threats. Please try to relax. And if you notice anything specific, something concrete, we'll investigate immediately." Karen scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. "You people never take this seriously until it's too late." The venom in her tone lingered in the air as Linda turned and walked away. She didn't respond, though her jaw tightened. She made her way down the aisle, her mind running in loops. She'd handled dozens of passenger complaints over the years, nervous flyers, entitled businessmen, even conspiracy theorists. But something about Karen's intensity set her on edge, not because she was right, but because she was obsessed. As Linda passed Tom's row, she cast a casual glance his way. He looked up, sensing her presence. Their eyes met, just for a moment. Linda smiled, and Tom offered a polite nod. Nothing about him felt out of place, and yet, back in 22A, Karen stewed. She could feel the eyes of a few passengers who'd noticed the exchange. Most had already turned back to their screens or books, but Karen's focus was locked in. She leaned toward the woman next to her, who had been quietly reading a magazine. "Excuse me," Karen whispered. "Do you see that man near the emergency exit?" The woman blinked, surprised. Yes? Doesn't he seem off to you?" Karen pressed. The woman glanced over at Tom, then back at Karen. "He's just reading. I'm not sure what you mean." Karen frowned. "He's been checking that bag since he boarded, nervously. I told the flight attendants, but they're ignoring it." "Isn't it better to be cautious?" The woman offered an uneasy smile. "Maybe, but if there was really a problem, I'm sure the crew would handle it." And just like that, she returned to her magazine. Karen clenched her jaw, her frustration deepening. No one was taking this seriously. Fine. Then it was up to her. She locked her eyes back on Tom, determined to watch his every move. Her body was tense, her grip on the armrest tight. But Tom, he remained blissfully unaware. He sipped from his water, turned another page, and let the hum of the engines wash over him like white noise. He was a man at peace. Even as the storm, 2 rows behind him, began to gather, drifted, already halfway to Los Angeles. He thought about the meeting that awaited him, the case he was preparing, and the weight it carried. Focused, calm, and unaware that just a few rows behind him, a storm was brewing. Karen, White's pulse quickened with each passing minute. Her mind replayed news headlines, stories of terrorists, disasters, missed warning signs. Every glance Tom gave to his bag seemed more sinister. Every sip of water, every page turn, felt calculated. She didn't see a man reading quietly, she saw a threat. The soft symphony of a long-haul flight filled the cabin. The hum of engines, the occasional ding of the seatbelt sign, the shuffle of feet heading toward the lavatory. Most passengers were asleep or absorbed in movies. But not Karen. Her eyes hadn't left Tom since takeoff. Each time he reached into his bag, her chest tightened. "This isn't normal," she told herself. Nobody checks their bag that often unless they're hiding something, unable to bear the silence any longer. She turned to the elderly man beside her. "Excuse me," she whispered. "Have you noticed the man near the emergency exit? He keeps checking his bag. Doesn't that seem suspicious?" The man looked up from his crossword, adjusted his glasses, and followed her gaze briefly before shrugging. "He's probably just nervous. Doesn't seem like anything to worry about." Karen's jaw clenched. How could he not see it? Desperate, she searched the cabin for someone, anyone, who might agree with her. Her eyes landed on a young woman across the aisle, earbuds out, glancing occasionally toward Tom's row. Karen leaned over. "Do you see that man? He's been acting strange, keeps checking his bag like he's hiding something dangerous." The woman looked up, startled by the intensity in Karen's voice. "I mean, he's just reading," she said. "I didn't really notice anything." Karen snapped. "Yes, there is something wrong. I've been watching him since we boarded. I told the flight attendant and no one's doing anything. Don't you think it's better to be safe than sorry?" The young woman leaned away slightly, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe it's best to let the flight crew handle it." Karen's voice rose, cutting through the quiet. "And what if it's too late by then? What if something happens? I'm not the only one who feels this way." Passengers nearby began to stir, heads turning toward the commotion, and toward Tom. Tom, who now sensed the shift in energy, looked up from his book. His brow furrowed as he noticed the stares, and then Karen. Their eyes met briefly. Confusion crossed his face. Linda was already moving down the aisle, the tension unmistakable. She stopped at Karen's seat, kneeling slightly. To keep the conversation discreet, "Ma'am," she said gently but firmly, "I'm going to need you to keep your voice down. You're disturbing other passengers." "What's the issue?" Karen pointed toward Tom, her expression resolute. "I've told you, he's acting suspicious. He keeps checking his bag like he's hiding something. He's up to something, and—" "You're doing nothing." Linda inhaled slowly, keeping her composure. "Ma'am, we've already spoken about this. There's no indication of a threat. We can't search a passenger's belongings without cause." Karen's voice rose again, sharp with frustration. "You keep saying that, but monitoring the situation isn't good enough. What if something terrible happens? Will you take it seriously then?" Passengers were murmuring now, some clearly annoyed, others casting wary glances at Tom. A few leaned into the aisle for a better look. Tom sat still, unsure of what was happening, but beginning to understand that he was at the center of it. Linda's tone grew firmer. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice. If this continues, we may have to take further action. Please return to your seat and allow us to do our job." Karen opened her mouth to speak. But just then, another voice cut through the tension. Was the co-pilot, stepping out of the cockpit with quiet authority. He looked directly at Karen. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" he asked, calm but commanding. Karen stood up, indignant. "Yes, there is. I believe that man is a threat and no one's doing anything about it." The co-pilot exchanged a look with Linda, then turned toward Tom. "I think it's time we clear this up," he said. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Captain Tom Johnson, your pilot for this flight. He was seated in the cabin while I took the first shift." Silence crashed over the cabin like a wave. Karen stared, frozen. The color drained from her face. Tom stood slowly, brushing a crease from his jacket. "Is there something you'd like to ask me, Mom?" he said, his voice calm but resolute. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. There was nothing left to say.